Good morning, everybody. If you're watching live, a little 49ers prospect report here as we get ready for the 2025 NFL Draft. Michigan monster defensive tackle Kenneth Grant and Michigan stud cornerback Will Johnson. Where do they fit in? Where do they land on the big board for the 49ers? And are they scheme fits? And what is Robert Saleh's scheme even going to be nowadays, coming back from the New York Jets for the San Francisco 49ers? All that and more coming at you right now.
You are Locked On 49ers, your daily San Francisco 49ers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On 49ers. Brian Peacock and Eric Crocker at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Thanks, everybody, for making us your first listen on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Love and appreciate all the everydayers out there, and welcome to the new listeners. Make sure you are subscribed. We really appreciate it. Helps us out tremendously and helps you out. So you can hang out with us all offseason long as we get ready for the 2025 NFL Draft and the 2025 regular season every stinking day here on Locked On 49ers. So subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. And today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just get started at FanDuel.com. All right, Croc, a couple of Michigan defenders. Now, this is a good football team. They've got a lot of talent. They weren't as good this year as they were with Jim Harbaugh's national championship squad. They lost a lot of that championship talent, their coach, their quarterback. Still got some studs over there on defense. We've already broken down Mason Graham, the defensive tackle, and he had a partner in crime who is even bigger and potentially even more athletic. Is he as good of a prospect, though, in Kenneth Grant? We'll talk Will Johnson as well, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on Will Johnson. You being the long corner prototype yourself, Croc. So you got a unique perspective on cornerback Will Johnson and how he might fit here in the NFL draft and potentially to the 49ers at pick 11. Let's start, though, with defensive tackle Kenneth Grant, a large human being listed, Croc, at 340 pounds, 6'3", 340, extremely light on his feet for that weight. What did you see when you put on the tape in Michigan and you watched Kenneth Grant next to Mason Graham on the interior?
I thought Mason Graham was better. And I mean, it was interesting because you could see how they both win, right? Like they're right there in the middle. They're right next to each other.
Yeah.
And from a power standpoint, it was very similar, being stout versus the run. I thought he and talking about Kenneth Grant, I thought he had a tremendous motor. There was one play where they ended up stripping the ball and it was a fumble, but just seeing him come back into the play, try to be a lead blocker for one of his guys and get in on the action. Like the motor is there, the strength is there, a good anchor versus doubles. I watched guys try to, they would try to double him and then reach to the next spot, but they don't even have him controlled yet because he does a really good job with that strength. He's not getting pushed out of there. I referenced the NFC Championship game against the Philadelphia Eagles with Javon Kinlaw like last week, where he's getting pushed 5 yards down the line. just get out of here, get out the club. That's not happening with Kenneth Grant. But when you watch him next to Graham, it was clear, like just Graham, like you talked about Grant. Grant he's nimble on his feet for his size, but he's not as nimble, I felt like, as Graham, who I thought was a better pass rusher. With Grant, when you watch him as a pass rusher, it was just speed to power. And at first I thought that's kind of what more so, and I say speed to power, it was just more power.
Yeah.
But I thought that's what Graham was. I'm like, just, kind of he's going to push the pocket a little bit. He's going to use that power and put a guy to the quarterback's lap. But then as I continue to watch Grant, I'm watching Graham hit guys with some swim moves, get skinny in the hole. And I'm like, oh, he's just better than Grant, in my opinion. But Grant being bigger and being as much as an athlete as he is, there may be some people that take that. But I walked away not expecting to like Graham more, but I think they're both really good prospects. And I got some good intel that the 49ers, they really, really want a defensive tackle in this draft. So if they go one of these guys at 11, I wouldn't be surprised. But if I had to choose between the two, I would go Graham. I felt like he would just gives you a little bit more. He gives you that same kind of anchor and power in the run game. He gives you that same kind of speed to power rushes. to knock the quarterback back, but it also gives you a little bit more finesse. And you referenced that. I hadn't seen it yet, but I did see it a lot on this film. So I'll go Graham, but I did like Grant as well.
Both good prospects. Clearly, Mason Graham is the better prospect. He's just a better football player, is the simplest way to put it there. Mozzie Smith is a name that comes up for a lot of people because there is some boomer bust with Kenneth Grant because he's that big. He's a very athletic guy for his size, but does he win enough? And he doesn't. For me, he's obviously got size. He's not going to get knocked out of there, but I want a little bit more of that if I'm going to draft a guy in the first round. So I'm looking at Kenneth Grant. I'm looking at him late first round, maybe even if he slips into second round, 43. If the 49ers don't go defensive tackle in round 1, then maybe looking at him. But clearly, if you're doing a pecking order of the defensive tackles we've done deep dives on, Croc, Mason Graham is 1. Walter Nolan is a clear 2, and Kenneth Grant is behind them, like pretty easily.
So the Los Angeles Rams, and I can't remember exactly how they did it, but I know they got Jared Verse, and then they got Braden Fisk.
Yeah.
Right. And was that first round, second round?
It was. Yep.
How much of a difference did that make for the Los Angeles Rams defense? That was a defense heading into the season where we were saying that they just don't have enough, right? Like they just, who are these guys? Who are these guys playing on defense? Aaron Donald, he ain't coming out of retirement to save them. And then the 49ers go up and score like six points in the game against the Rams. And all of a sudden it's like, hey, the Rams, the defense is pretty damn good. And you're watching how they're getting after the quarterback. And, they were about to break a record for like postseason sacks. Like they're getting after it. And a big part of it was Jared Verse and Braden Fisk, 2 guys that they drafted back-to-back rounds. Would you be opposed to the 49ers saying, you know what, we really have to address our defensive line and we got to get better opposite Nick Bosa? We've been trying to pay some guys and kind of go about it that way. But what if they were able to say, we're going to go edge at pick 11 because we're going to get this athletic freak. And then second round, hey, let's go in them trenches again on the defense side and maybe get Grant. Now, I don't know if Grant's going to be there because, again, just his profile says people are just going to really like him.
Yeah.
But, man, like that would be – you start talking about getting that easing that transition for the 49ers. And I talked about this last week. There's just transition from having a lot of great players playing at a very high level, and then all those guys a little older, banged up. Maybe some guys didn't quite work out. Okay, then you're gonna have to pay Brock Purdy a lot of money. Can Brock Purdy help you through this transition where you're not as great at a lot of positions? But if you hit on a draft like this, especially on defense, where you can lean on your defense to get you those stops because you got an edge rusher in the first round and an interior plugger on the second round, that's what could be really big for the 49ers.
Double up. I'm with you. I'm into that as well. You got to figure out offensive tackle. Tackle's still a little more of a future need than a current need. 49ers have been more about kind of chasing that more current need generally in the NFL draft, especially early. And it's not honestly the best strategy. We can talk about that a little bit later in the week, Croc. In fact, I do want to talk about the 49ers in the first and second round and what that's looked like for them and why their strategy should be what it should be this season. But for someone like Kenneth Grant, and look, by the way, Niners needing defensive tackles, that's not super breaking news, right? They better be. They better really, really want a defensive tackle, right? They need a couple of them. And it's an awesome draft to get one. You don't have to get one at 11. There's going to be a really good player there probably in the second round, third round, day 2, mid rounds. You can get some more one-dimensional. There's some penetrators. There's some big pluggers. There's the Kenneth Grant's not the only 340-pound defensive tackle in this class either. So the 49ers can do that a lot of ways in this draft at defensive tackle. They got to come out of this with at least one. And, man, come out of this draft with a couple of defensive tackles.
Where was Braden Fisk? And obviously, we know he went to the – I'm pulling up his stuff right now. We know he got drafted to the
Rams, I think.
Los Angeles Rams.
The Rams
he's older,
traded down or traded up. I can't remember.
So he's an older guy. He's 25 years old now. He turned 25 in January. So he was an older prospect. Started off at Western Michigan. Maybe that's why I then transferred to Florida State. But picked 39. So that's kind of high in the second round. But that's around where the 49ers would be picking in the second round. And you and I, we watched Braden Fisk. Didn't like him quite at pick 31. Felt like maybe there was some different directions 49ers could have went. You and I know I definitely like really Cooper Tagine at pick 31, but 49ers went in a different direction. All right, cool. if they were to double up on D-line, it looks like they are able, this is the draft for them because of where they're picking to be able to do that and get a guy like Braden Fisk in the second round. Braden Fisk, what do you have, 7 sacks this year? I mean, like he did very well. And when he went out of a game, I think he missed some of the game in the postseason or whatever. Like that hurt them.
The scouting report really showed up with both of their picks too. Like they hit on exactly what it was. And Braden Fisk, the reason I didn't like him is because I don't think he fits the 49ers scheme as well as he fit the Rams scheme, because he played a little bit more 5 technique for the Rams, and he because they have a little bit more of an odd front, and Verse was more outside backer / edge defensive end type of a player. They're going to play 4-man fronts in those sort of a scheme as well. But I don't think they had to rely on Fisk as much of as a beastly run defender inside as the 49ers need from their defensive tackles. And that's where I didn't like Braden Fisk. I thought he's more of a second, third round guy. Motor was absolutely there, and he was a pass rusher, and he keeps coming. But as a run defender, as a pure inside guy, I was worried about him, and that showed up. Like the sacks were there, but people forget you got to stop the run on first and second down so you can pass rush on third down, right? And so that's where Braden Fisk fell off for me, and you saw some of that, and the Rams had some games where they couldn't stop the run. I think that was a little bit of a part of it. Verse was kind of opposite. He's a power guy for an end and set the edge like a monster, speed to power, bull rush like a monster off the edge. So interesting couple of players, but the thing that hit for both of them, and that's always something you got to, if I'm scouting defensive linemen, the number one thing I'm looking for, motor. Both those dudes had a motor. Mason Graham's got a motor. Kenneth Grant, good, right? But motor's the number one thing that really, really, really translates and matters in the NFL, and some of the other stuff you can coach, and some of it you can't if you're just a freak, which some of these defensive linemen are.
We're putting together our big board. We both agree that Graham is over Grant.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No doubt. Absolutely. I don't think Kenneth Grant is like the Mozzie Smith sort of a bust of another big athletic, because Mozzie Smith is a freak, just like Kenneth Grant. And that's why Kenneth Grant probably doesn't get to the 49ers at 43. But I do think he's that kind of late 1, early 2 kind of a guy. But a team's going to fall in love with the traits maybe after all those clean first round grades are gone. And that's probably where Kenneth Grant will go, I think, in the NFL draft. There was some weight issues. He might have gotten up to, over 350 at some point, which a lot of big guys, it's not surprising when really big guys. So you got to go to the combine and prove you're in good shape, and then really show some of those rare movement skills for how big you are at the combine, which is huge. But yeah, just his win rate just wasn't quite there for all of the athletic tools and ability that Kenneth Grant had, which is why I like a couple of defensive tackles better than him. Next, let's stay on Michigan. That defense, let's talk Will Johnson, cornerback, who's a stud player in his own right. Could he be a fit for the San Francisco 49ers as high as pick 11, or could he go even higher? Some really high-end comps for Will Johnson, and his fans are numerous, Croc. Are you one of them? We'll get into that next. Today's episode of Locked On 49ers brought to you by FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on that action than FanDuel. That's why they're America's #1 sports book. The NBA All-Star Game is in the books, and now really gets serious in the NBA as you get toward the playoffs. It's a really fun time of year. It's draft season. You can bet on the NFL draft, tons of draft props and more to come at FanDuel. You get Major League Baseball starting. So I really love this time of year, even though football season is over, and there's still tons of action to get in on at FanDuel. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All you got to do is visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Croc. Will Johnson, 6'2" cornerback out of 6'2", 202, cornerback out of Michigan, early entry into the NFL draft. And man, I've got some takes on Will Johnson, but I also have some questions on Will Johnson that make it a little bit more difficult. And I think just scouting in general, it's always a lot easier to scout the linemen. First of all, they're always on the screen, and it's less scheme dependent. A lot of times you can really see the traits. You can really see it pop. You watch a corner, Croc, and you watch an entire game of Will Johnson, and maybe he gets targeted one time, right? So it starts, you have to watch like 10 games just to see like the full gamut of stuff. Maybe there's a lot of zone in the scheme and you want to see some man reps. Maybe there's a lot of man reps and you want to see what he looks like in off coverage. For Will Johnson, he plays a ton of off coverage, and the 49ers defense do play a lot of off coverage, right? So it was fun to see that and how he played. But at the same time, Croc, he's like 12 yards off the line. And I'm like, well, I didn't get to see anything on half the reps that I'm watching him because he's so far off, and he's just like, okay, he's ready to make a play, but you don't really get to see him up close pressing. You don't really get to see where's the deep speed. So talk to me about Will Johnson. What did you see when you put on the tape?
Yeah, no, definitely a lot of off coverage. And, look, as even a high school coach, if you told me I have Kenneth Grant and Graham up front and some other terrific guys who are probably 3, 4, 5-star talented guys getting after the quarterback, I probably rely more on pressure from my front four and then just coverage, off coverage on the back end. And maybe I'm lying a little bit because I just like being a little bit more aggressive, but I can understand having him off coverage a little bit more. You did talk about one thing though. He's 6'2". See, I didn't know he was 6'2", but that makes a lot of sense when you look at the notes. All right. So one of my notes said, doesn't look overly twitchy, wins more with anticipation and mind as opposed to looking overly athletic. And the person that came to mind with that, because some other notes I have, has a really good pedal, reads zone concepts extremely well. So essentially that's, if you have, a 2-to-1 read and 2 goes away, he does a good job of squeezing 1, or if 1 does a shallow, he does a really good job of squeezing 2, and he's comfortable with doing all those things. So I thought he was a technician from that standpoint. And one guy came to mind who I wasn't super high on. I'd say super high. He was my 3rd corner in the class that he was in, but he just won Defensive Player of the Year. That's Patrick Surtain. So now the difference is with Surtain at Alabama, you saw a ton of press reps. So you were able to see him at the line of scrimmage, playing man coverage, exactly what that looked like. Again, wasn't overly twitchy, but he was one of the best cornerbacks that I've seen just from a patient standpoint at the line of scrimmage. Now, my other 2 corners that I had over him in that class was J.C. Horn and Greg Newsome, the kid that went to the Cleveland Browns. Both good cornerbacks in their own right. Not Patrick Surtain. All right. Now, where I see some similarities with this is just comfortable with his technique, comfortable with his turn and run. You didn't see a lot of the press reps like you would see from some of these other, like especially like SEC schools. But I saw him in off. I saw him in the pedal. I saw him man turn and run. I watched him play against Ohio State's Marvin Harrison Jr. and what that looked like, and just being competitive. Had a really nice interception, trusting the coverage behind him. They had kind of this bracket coverage on him. So he was off at 5. He played catch, cut off the route, picked it off. There were a lot of things that I felt like he did consistently well. And when you go to Michigan, we can go back a few years. 49ers drafted a cornerback out of Michigan, Ambry Thomas. I think he's a much better prospect than Ambry Thomas. And Ambry, he was another guy who played well off coverage, but I don't know if he had the same kind of anticipation that Will Johnson had, and definitely like the consistency with his technique, no matter where he's playing at. It was very good. And I went back because you and I would just watch Travis Hunter, and I think it aligned with what we thought we would see, or at least what I thought I would see, which was a more technically refined corner, but maybe not as athletic, as opposed to Travis Hunter, who is more athletic, definitely twitchier, but wins more with athleticism as opposed to being more of a technician like Johnson. So I'm curious to see where the NFL is on these 2 guys, because they win in 2 different ways. But I do think, as it pertains to him fitting with the 49ers and what they do, they run a lot of off coverage. They like to run quarters. And I think with him having good anticipation, being able to play those zones, being able to play man and man turn and run vertical with guys, and has the size. I like guys more 5'11", 6 feet, but he's a little taller than that. I think he is a fit for the 49ers for sure if he were to go to pick 11.
Yeah, he's just so smooth out there. And that's where I struggle, because some people, the big question on him is people aren't sure about his speed. So he can go to the combine. Is he actually 6'2"? He's probably, maybe he's 6'1". I don't know, but he's got plenty of length. How fast does he run is the key. because I do see the Patrick Surtain comps for Will Johnson. And so that's
has that been out there? Is that a thing?
A lot of people see that, Croc. And it's hard for me to put that quite on him. Surtain, by the way, though, and there's a reason, just because it's the prototype, it's the archetype that he is. I think is more of the comp than just like, oh, he's that player. But at the combine, I got it right here. Where is Patrick Surtain, 6'2", 208. And so, maybe Will Johnson's a little bit more narrow, but, pretty close. 6'2", 208, 32.5-inch arm length, which is really long for a cornerback. Anything over 32 is really good. Big hands, 10-inch hands. He ran 4.42, 39-inch vertical jump, 18 bench press reps, which is nice for a long-armed, skinny cornerback too. Croc, I believe, didn't you push up 17 recently of the 225?
I did 13
okay.
At the end of a workout. All right, because first I was like, I got to hit 315. I haven't tried in a while. Hit that, boom. All right, no big deal. But then I still had to finish my bench press workout, and I did 13, which happened to be the amount that I did in college for my pro day or junior day. Junior day we tested, and I hit 13. So not 18. That is much stronger than I was.
And that's Patrick Surtain. So that's the thing with Will Johnson, is he still has to go to the combine and throw down all of that. And then we can start talking about Patrick Surtain. But that's the big question with Will Johnson. I want to get into this next, and I want to talk a little bit about Robert Saleh and what even the scheme is these days with Robert Saleh and what they might be looking for at different positions, because the Jets roster build has been very different than the 49ers roster build with positions. And they have a superstar corner over there. Does Robert Saleh want that in his scheme? So I want to talk about that next. Will Johnson, Robert Saleh's scheme, and we'll finish up this episode of Locked On 49ers. Okay, Croc. So the Patrick Surtain stuff. Will Johnson still has to go to the combine and be legit 6'2", 200 something, right? 4'4", 240. Is he going to get there? I don't know. But that's a lot to ask. Patrick Surtain. Like, Patrick Surtain is exactly how you want to draw it up if you want a stud outside cornerback. And Will Johnson's tape is really good. I wish I would have seen more man reps. I wanted to see him man up with the guy throughout the route.
You want to see those hips turn and kind of some more turn around from press and how he's reading down guys. Again, he did have the patience, and he was very technical with a lot of what he did, and he did have the anticipation. So I'd assume, like, if you can play off coverage that way and you have that length, Coach Croc can teach you how to play press man like that.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, and so my comp is different. I'm going to go to a different comp of a guy who played a whole bunch of cover three, a guy who's breaking on the receivers' routes before he does. I saw that with Will Johnson. I saw Richard Sherman.
Ooh.
Another long cornerback, right? A guy that maybe the top speed, who knows what. And that's the thing with Will Johnson. If Will Johnson throws down a 4.42, he's going to be drafted before the 49ers pick at 11. If Will Johnson runs a 4.55, you maybe just say no to him anyway if he is there at 11, because then, because you're really chasing those man skills. And that's kind of insane to be like, man, that much of a difference at the combine, 4.45 versus 4.55 could mean like half a round at least, the difference for a corner, especially in a player like Will Johnson. Should it matter that much? I don't know, but seeing him so much in cover three, seeing the length and seeing how instinctive Will Johnson was, and I like Will Johnson a lot. The question is he a top 10 guy? And so I think he has to finish the job at the combine, and because I just didn't get to see it. But he's also, this is one of the things I learned from you too, Croc, talking about guys in coverage. He's not worried about getting beat deep. Like, he's cool. He's like, I'm ready. You're going deep. Cool. I'm going to turn and run. But he never gets targeted. But you didn't get to see the early part of the route because he's so deep and off coverage all the time too. He is, though, with the long legs, I think just naturally biomechanically a little bit later on the not on the breaks. He's really quick on breaking with receivers. He often made a break as or even before a wide receiver's making the breaks. That's why I thought of Richard Sherman, because Richard Sherman was running routes for dudes in the NFL. It was awesome to watch, right? And so for that reason, I think Will Johnson's got a super high floor. The question is, what's the ceiling? Is he going to shut guys down? Is he Patrick Surtain with that athletic ceiling in man coverage in the NFL? Would be my big question with Will Johnson. The combine is big there, but just being long-legged, it's just a little harder to get going. So even though he does break quickly with his mind, sometimes just getting there on like an in-breaking route, and again, that's kind of, he's often off coverage and outside shade. So I think he's kind of, inside is where the offenses are going to be able to win against that too. So that's why the scheme almost makes me mad watching Will Johnson's tape, because I feel like the evaluation is a little incomplete for me right now. And so I just have enough questions to not be like easy sending the card at 11. He's a top 10 guy all day. He might be, but it's a little bit more difficult. I want to see more man. But I think the floor is really high. The other problem is he was hurt. He shut it down for like early in the season, maybe played 5 or 6 games, and he had a foot injury. And so Niners going to take a guy who's injured. That's the thing with Josh Simmons too, right? It's like 2 best players on the board might be Josh Simmons and Will Johnson. Are they even healthy to work out at the combine? And so you get into other questions for the 49ers at pick 11 as well. But as far as the tape, super high floor Will Johnson, he might be a perennial all-pro corner, but I just didn't see enough of the man reps, and I can't really put that stamp on him, and got to see the combine.
Yeah, at the NFL level, you will be required to play a lot of man.
Yes.
In college, in the high school level, you can say, you know what, we're a quarters team and we're just going to play a lot of quarters. Or we're a cover 3 team. We're going to play a lot of cover 3, right? You see that with like Iowa. They're just going to play their coverage. The NFL, they'll run their zones for sure. They may run, cover 3, cover 4, and they may run like, 25% cover 4, 25%, cover 3. They're going to run 50% man. So like you have to be able to, and that's a 50-50 split in man versus zone, but it's just a lot more man than they're used to running a lot of times, depending on where they come from in college. You did reference his height. You said, listed at 6'2". Is he still really going to be that high? Then you talked about Richard Sherman. I was at a track meet yesterday. So today we're recording Monday morning. Sunday we were at a track meet and our kids were running at the same time. So I see Richard Sherman and we talked for a little bit. And one thing that I recognize, right? I'm 6'1", listed at 6'2". Richard Sherman is a real 6'3". Like it felt like he was towering over me. I'm like, why do I feel small standing next to Richard Sherman? So you talk about Sherman and having that length and being that kind of height, and Will Johnson, we'll find out what he truly is when he goes to the combine. But that is one thing that helped Sherman. I'm super lengthy when it comes to my arms and just length and athleticism and those things, but didn't test as well, right? Ran, I want to say, in the 4.56, 4.57 range.
I think 4.57, if I had to guess, was what it was. Yeah, 6'3",
right.
33-inch arms or something like that, like really long arms for a corner. He was long and smooth, but he won with his mind. Richard Sherman did more than anything else, and his length helped him out a lot. And plus, he didn't have to play man a lot. That Legion Boom defense was all cover 3 all the time. It doesn't quite happen that way in the NFL anymore.
Right. So I'm curious to see. And with Michigan, interesting they went that route with some of the things that they did defensively. And I want to say their defensive coordinator in the past, they had the guy that was Seahawks head coach now, right? He was with Baltimore Ravens. I think he got to Baltimore from Michigan. Mm-hmm. So I wonder how much some of the scheme has changed. You can be a part of a defense and have some different philosophies and thoughts on how exactly you would do it. Some things be similar, but I did feel like there was a lot more off coverage. Even as years, I talked about Ambry Thomas. They ran off coverage, but he played a lot, even in zone at the line of scrimmage. So I always tell people, press coverage. Press is an alignment. All right, jamming is the act of putting hands on guys. That's a technique. But you can play press alignment, and Ambry Thomas did this where, hey, I'm playing at the line of scrimmage, but yeah, I can funnel him inside still from there and still read. If somebody comes out, I can fall back on that. If nobody comes out, then I can squeeze that. And I thought Ambry Thomas did a good job of that. 49ers like, we're going to play you a lot of off coverage. And I didn't think that was best suited for him. Interested to see with Will Johnson how that part kind of translates. But I like you got a big, tall, long corner like that. Like, man, simplify it and play him at the line of scrimmage.
And the thing is that's usually the thing that you don't see that much off. Usually when we talk about prospects, they're like, oh, he was one of their best guys and he's always pressed up and we didn't get to see him off. And with Will Johnson, it was kind of the opposite. I wanted to see more man, and because he was off all the time. And he was like way off a lot of the time. But thus is what we get when we're scouting prospects in the NFL. That's why it is not an exact science. Here's the question I have for you, Croc. Robert Saleh. So the 49ers traditionally, the wide 9 is you have big defensive ends, 270 pounds, that line up wide and they crush dudes from the outside and funnel everything back inside. And obviously, things have kind of transitioned from where the 49ers started with the scheme and Robert Saleh in 2017 to what it became with D'Amico. And then, now with Robert Saleh coming back, you go to the New York Jets, New York and the 49ers haven't been putting a lot of resources into defensive backs and cornerbacks and drafting them super early. The New York Jets drafted Sauce Gardner in the top 4. The New York Jets drafted Will Johnson, or not Will Johnson, who's the Iowa State defensive end outside linebacker that they drafted a couple years ago.
Will McDonald.
Yeah, thank you. And he's 240 something pounds, right? He's more like what we see with Jalen Walker in this draft or James Pierce in this draft. They had some other dudes and some big dudes, Quentin Williams on the inside, right? So I'm just trying to figure out where the 49ers defense is. Is it so multiple that it doesn't matter anymore? Do you need a 1 technique nose and a 3 technique, or you just need 2 really good players inside, a defensive tackle? Do you need size on the outside? Are you okay drafting a guy who's a super athletic edge rusher to be on the outside? Will the 49ers go that direction? Is it so multiple that they just need all of the players? So whatever the best player is, they'll draft them. Would they be a team that would draft a corner at number 11? So I'm kind of confused about what even this is, because, and maybe Robert Saleh didn't have a choice because he wasn't the GM in New York, whereas, the coaches have a much bigger say in San Francisco of what they're getting for their scheme with the players they draft, because in New York, the players that they drafted doesn't really match up with how the team has been built in San Francisco for Robert Saleh's defense.
I think one thing that the 49ers can do, and you have a type, I'm sure, but man, just go get good players. And the best coaches figure out how to make those good players work around what they like to do. I would love to run a certain defense, here at Stag, where I'm the head coach. Man, I have this guy who played linebacker last year, but he's a scrappy kid and he's moving around. And it's like, I want to put you at safety, but I'm going to put you at this position to where, these offensive linemen can't reach you at the second level. I want to keep you free. I've never done that before, but because you have a certain type of talent and you feel like he can excel in a certain role, you adjust some of the things that you do a little bit to where it actually makes you a little bit more multiple and versatile with what you can do defensively. I think the 49ers, man, I get it. This guy may not be exactly what you've had in the past, but man, if he's athletic and he's a talent and he has a certain ability, man, lean into that and adjust a little bit. And I think Robert Saleh is a guy who has shown the ability to do that with what he did in the secondary with New York.
We will continue to build our big board for the San Francisco 49ers here as we roll toward the 2025 NFL draft. Talk about all the topics that pop up for the 49ers. Fernando asks about Max Crosby. We can address this. I don't know if there's any more reports about this. He says, Max to the Niners. Max visited the Bay Area over the weekend. Well, a lot of people visited the Bay Area as the NBA All-Star game. So I don't know.
That would be tampering if he visited the 49ers.
You can't visit the 49ers.
They lose a high draft pick.
I wouldn't look anything to that. If Max Crosby becomes available, I think John Lynch might make a call. But I think I'd call about Myles Garrett first. I think the cost would be similar. Crosby a little younger than Myles Garrett, but probably more likely you could pry a player from the Browns than you could from the Raiders if you're the 49ers. Just kind of guessing there. And one more comment here about the Hargrave bubble. Yeah, I'm sorry. We talked about defensive tackles. I didn't bring up the bubble. It's all about the bubble. You got that. You got that backside. You got the sand in the pants to hold up. Kenneth Grant has got a bubble. Not quite a Hargrave level bubble though.
Can we go one more here?
Yeah.
Right here. Same guy. And he says, what were the last 3 draft picks that were combine studs that actually panned out? And I would say this: most of the guys that go in the first round are typically combine studs. Now, is it like overwhelming stud? Like, oh, maybe ran a 4.22 or something like that. Like, maybe not. But most of the guys that are drafted in the first round, they're in the higher percentile with a lot of the testing that, so, I mean, and guys pan out every year.
And you're not like you're not taking a guy in the 5th round and he blows up the combine. You're like, okay, first round. I think there's been like in the past some really bad like combine stars that didn't turn out great. It's just, you're just checking a box. That's it. Right. Like Will Johnson. You're just like, man, I'm going to spend a top 10 pick on this dude. This guy better be able to freaking run with NFL guys, right? So I want to see 4.45 if I'm going to draft him in the top 10. It's not so much like, oh man, he's a 3rd round guy. Oh, he ran 4.3. top 10 pick, right? So you're checking boxes here. And so if you want to draft the prospect high, you want to see awesome tape. You want to see him go to the Senior Bowl and crush it. You want to see him go to the combine, check off every single box for you. You want to have high character player that plays hard. The coaches rave about him. He's great in interviews, and just check every box for you so you can sleep at night when you draft him that high. That's what it's all about. So the combine is just another box to check. All right. Thanks everybody for tuning in here. And Croc and I, of course, will be back. We're going to be doing a mock draft this week. We are going to be checking in on our big board. We're going to be breaking down more prospects. So let us know whatever prospects you want to hear about and want us to get into. And we'll be building our big board through at least the top 50 players, probably, because we got to get prepared for pick 43, just as well as pick 11 as we get ready for this NFL draft with our big board at BD Peacock at Crocky209. Drop a comment on YouTube. Croc and I back next time right here. Locked On 49ers.